Talking about Green Deal structures and the associated challenges. I'm concentrating very much on the domestic scene, but most of these principles apply to non-domestic as well. So in devising the most appropriate structure, I'm going to be looking initially at the processes from the start to finish the Green Deal process, then the challenges raised by some of the steps in the Green Deal, and lastly, different types of structures. Just starting off, just to familiarise ourselves with the basic Green Deal structure, which has already been presented, but we have the Green Deal provider. It has its contract with the householder, which is called the Green Deal plan. The householder repays the Green Deal loan to the electricity supplier in the electricity bill, and the electricity supplier then passes that payment back to the Green Deal provider. So that's the basic Green Deal structure. So then just looking at the Green Deal process, and this is just to give the idea of how complex and how many different steps are involved. Obviously the initial steps are marketing and customer contact, and here it's quite vital that the Green Deal is portrayed in a simplified manner, but at the same time it doesn't mislead the customer. So we've got marketing, customer contact. Then, after customer contact, an assessment of the house will be made, following which energy saving measures will be proposed and an EPC certificate will be produced. So then essentially the tender process starts, and there's what's called the Green Deal Arrangements Agreement, and this is the agreement, the national agreement between the Green Deal providers and the electricity suppliers. And under that agreement there's an opportunity for the Green Deal provider to check the history of electricity payments for that householder. So they'll be able to check whether that householder has a bad credit history. And then the Green Deal provider will carry out a survey of the house. It will determine what eco-funding is available for that house, and also determine the type of finance it will have available, and then it will be in a position to provide a quote to the householder. Now, on domestic, if the cost of the Green Deal measures cost more than $10,000, essentially there'll need to be 3 different quotes from 3 different Green Deal providers. Then the Green Deal, the householder will need to get any appropriate consents in place, so from its landlord, or the landlord from the tenant, and potentially from the mortgagee. And it's only at that stage do you get the contract being put into place with the householder. Then under domestic you have a cooling off period. You can't start the works until you wait for 14 days. And then if planning is required, then you will have to obtain planning permission. Then the installation works carried out. Then any registrations are implemented. So by registrations, the EPC certificate will be updated. And if there's feed-in tariff or RHI relevance, then you would have to accredit it under the feed-in tariff and the renewable heat incentive. So you've installed the Green Deal measures, and then there's a customer aftercare, which includes the warranty. Now DEC has just recently changed the warranty parameters. Now for domestic, they're proposing it's a 5-year warranty for the Green Deal measures themselves, and a 10-year warranty in relation to any damage caused to the building. And also there's loan management. You're talking about a loan for potentially up to 25 years. So it's the whole process of the loan management. So one of the challenges from the process is that the time taken from the initial customer contact to entering into a contract, the Green Deal plan with the customer, to actually doing the installation works. And the time taken, the industry has suggested that could be as long as 6 months long. There's also the complexity of the Green Deal and the cost efficiency. And there, as you've seen, potentially there'll be 4 or 5 visits to the householder just to get the Green Deal plan in place. So one of the issues is try to condense all those steps as much as possible, whilst maintaining compliance with the standards and the Green Deal Code. And also, as we've already mentioned earlier, there's the other issue is the adoption risk, i.e. how do you ensure adoption by the householders given the quite novel process and the challenge of the Golden Rule. So essentially this is the most basic structure where the Green Deal provider acts essentially as a one-stop shop. So here the Green Deal provider carries out all the different steps themselves. So for example, they would do the marketing, customer contact, assessment. So they would do the assessment themselves as an impartial assessor, survey, quotes, etc. The problem with this structure is that not many entities have all this expertise and resources in-house. If we take, for example, what happened with PV and the utility companies, very few utility companies had enough resources to do domestic and social housing installations. So a different model is for the Green Deal provider to essentially outsource a lot of the activities. And here I've got the assessor as a dotted line with the householder because potentially the assessor is completely independent from the Green Deal provider and will have a contract directly with the householder. The alternative is they have a contract with the Green Deal provider. The Green Deal provider outsources the marketing, installation and the loan management. One of the issues with this type of model is there's lots of different players involved, and accordingly in terms of the process we've got too many different players and there's too many different steps involved in the process. So where the one idea that the industry is playing with is instead of a Green Deal provider taking the initiative, it's almost the local installers, the local SMEs, so I'll put it, the man in the white van, as it were, takes the initiative. They've got the existing client relationship. They're already in the person's house. So, for example, they're servicing their boiler. They tell the householder, you need a new boiler. I can do the new boiler under the Green Deal plan. And at the same time, they can introduce other energy-saving measures. Now, to do this, they will have to be accredited and be an assessor under the Green Deal rules. And so once they've agreed the terms of the energy-saving measures with the householder, they will then contact the Green Deal provider, who will then provide the financing and enter into the contract directly with the householder. Obviously, an issue for the Green Deal provider is they're relying on a company that's essentially acting as their agent, and there's potentially a branding issue and essentially a quality issue in that respect. But the advantage of this model is essentially the Green Deal provider agent, as I've called them, can condense as much as the steps as possible, and they have the existing client relationship. Now, we've already spoken about local authority procured schemes, and I'm just going to go through 2 different types of local authority schemes. We're acting on the Birmingham scheme and the Newcastle, one for bidder and the other one for local authority. And essentially, in the local authority procured schemes, the local authority is offering a range of different measures. For example, they may be providing financing themselves, either through debt or having equity, i.e. shares in the actual Green Deal provider. They'll be providing the benefit of their branding. So, for example, Newcastle will be the Warm Up North brand to essentially give trust as far as the householder is concerned. And also, as previously explained, they will also be potentially bringing housing to the project. So not only domestic housing, but commercial housing. And to ensure, because well, to ensure the success of these schemes, they're also trying to bring as many public bodies as possible to their projects. So, for example, Newcastle are not only looking at other local authorities, but they're looking at social housing providers, the ambulance service, the fire authorities, so as many other public bodies as possible. So I should have said one of the issues with this type of scheme is it has to follow the procurement regulations, which tends to be quite an expensive process and takes anything from 12 to 18 months to procure a Green Deal provider. And essentially, under this type of scheme, so you take Birmingham, for example, they'll only end up with one Green Deal provider, which obviously means that essentially only the big players will be able to go for these types of schemes. So an alternative local authority type of scheme is, instead of them going out to procurement for a Green Deal provider, they will set up their own accredited panel of Green Deal providers, and anyone can join that panel, and essentially all they have to do is meet certain criteria, which will obviously include the Green Deal Code of Practice and the other Green Deal regulations, but can also include some extra local authority requirements. The advantage of this model is potentially they don't have to go under the procurement regulations, and so you won't end up with one Green Deal provider, and it does mean that all the local tradesmen and the local SMEs can apply to join this local authority panel, as it were. And the advantage is that the Green Deal providers under this structure will obtain the local authority branding, but also have the opportunity to obtain financing if that's required from the local authority. That's it.